Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast, where we talk to foresters about how they are using digital technologies in their day-to-day forestry work. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Digital Forester Podcast. Today, I am super pumped. I have Alicia Sullivan joining us. She's currently with Google. She's a product manager with the Google Earth Engine Sustainability Solutions. I just had to say it, even though we just talked momentarily, and she said, you could just say Google Engine, but I wanted to say the full enchilada. But really pumped to have you on this show, Alicia. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kevin. Nice to see you as well. It's been a long time.
For sure, for sure. And so are we still reaching you out in the Pacific Northwest somewhere?
Yep, I am in beautiful North Bend, Washington, which is about 30 miles east of Seattle.
Nice, nice, good stuff. And so as we were kind of warming up here, and chatting, it's been a long time. I think last time we connected, you were still with Weyerhaeuser, and this was in the wait, look at my notes again as we giggled when we said it last time, somewhere in the 2009 to 2014 range, somewhere sandwiched in between there, and obviously it's 2023. But maybe
Yep.
for our listeners to start things off, while we say you're with Google, you've been a lot of other cool places, which we'll touch on. But you started off and trained as a forester, so maybe share with
Mhm.
us how you got into forestry. I believe you studied at U Washington, did a bachelor's of science, as well as a master's, and maybe a stint down in New Zealand as well. But maybe
Mhm.
how did you happen onto forest science and forestry in general? Something in the family or in the blood, or what was it?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, like my family is really big into the outdoors. Like as a kid, my dad would always take us out, like rafting, skiing, being outside, and that was something that I always really identified with. As far as like how I got into forestry, I actually have an uncle who's a professor of agricultural soil science, and he was at the Oregon State University. And so I kind of knew about forestry through him. And also, I think I always joke with my dad. I used to go and work at his office. He was a CPA when I was a kid, and I would go in and do really boring things like shred paper and stuff like that. And I'm like, I never want to work at an office. This is awful. And so when I went to college and realized that there was a discipline that would allow me to like wander around in the woods and potentially get paid for it, I was like, okay, I'm in. So University of Washington studied actually urban forestry and environmental horticulture and spent a year in New Zealand, which is really where I kind of turned my focus towards forest management. Got to work at the University of Canterbury for about a year and work with some really great professors down there that were really into silviculture and some of the stuff that I just hadn't been exposed to yet. So, and then went to work for the Department of Natural Resources here in Washington State and the Forest Service for a bit, and decided that I wanted to go back to school primarily because I saw a really big opportunity for the application of technology in forestry. When I was working in the woods, it was a while ago, like 20 years ago, and technology was kind of a dirty word at that point. And so, but I saw this opportunity and the ability to kind of amplify or scale people's impact by having technology as part of their tool set. So that's what I went back and focused on remote sensing, specifically for forest inventory and working on the early days of LiDAR for that.
Yeah, no, very cool, very cool. So you didn't follow in the family trade craft is what I'm hearing. I'm feeling like I should take notes with my kids if I don't want them to go in a particular profession. I should take them there and just show them the dirty
Right,
side, and maybe they'll go a different way. So that's
right.
super cool. And so I just wanted to maybe you said technology was a dirty word back
Hmm.
then. What what can you maybe shed some more light on that? Because again, you and I have been at this for a very long time. I'd probably say, we're a different generation, maybe not to date ourselves, but it is true. There's been some uphills in terms of getting foresters to adopt technology, and arguably that may still be happening now. And that is
Yeah.
a different theme we'll touch on, as I'll be curious in your thoughts. But shed some light back in the day. What were those technologies? You mentioned LiDAR was coming online, but what were some of those other things that had piqued your interest or maybe caught your attention to go back to do that master's degree?
Yeah, totally. So when I started at the Department of Natural Resources, the GIS was still based in Unix in a centralized database, and for folks that have not experienced, having to use a digitization board, you have no idea how painful it is to do GIS with blind digitizing. But I saw the potential in GIS, and I was very fortunate actually in my undergrad to have someone named Phil Hurwitz, who is like a GIS guru who taught the forestry GIS class. And I liked it as a person who kind of was a digital native. I mean, I had a computer in my house as a kid. It was easy for me to figure out Esri's very complex, user interface that maybe wasn't, as easy for folks who were from an older generation to pick up. So one of the things that happened at the Forest Service was my boss was like, "Hey, you just graduated. You know how to use that GIS thing, right? Can you make me some maps?" And so I did it, and I liked it. And then I also worked on some landscape visualization modeling when I worked for the DNR, and that was kind of what really got me into thinking about graduate school because we were setting up a timber sale along the highway that goes into the entrance for Mount Rainier National Park. So there's like 7 million people that drive by it or something every year. And so I was tasked with trying to figure out the view shed. And at the time, there was a tool called LMS or Landscape Management System, and it had some visualization aspects to it. And through kind of working with that and producing a final product that could help us see what this thing would look like, I was really like, oh, okay, there's something to this GIS visualization data wrangling thing that I want to work on.
Yeah, very cool. So I suspect some listeners might be going, "Yeah, LMS, haven't heard that in a while. Yay!"
Yeah.
Or us that are used to, Arc Edit 999 and all
Yeah.
these random codes and
Right.
custom tick marks and all that painful
Yeah.
stuff. Yeah, it dates us for sure. So definitely
Mhm.
cool. And I think you're going to bring an interesting perspective to this podcast because not only have you done graduate studies, but you mentioned you work for Washington State Department of Natural Resources, so you have that public sector experience. But as we look forward, you ended up at Weyerhaeuser, which everybody who's going to be listening to this knows who Weyerhaeuser is. But maybe tell us how you got to be there. Was that a confluence of rivers that created that opportunity, or is that something you sought out, or any cool stories on how you ended up getting to Weyerhaeuser?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I went into graduate school like I think it was like 2 or 3 years after I got my undergrad, and I was paying for it myself, and I was looking at it as like, how do I make more money and advance my career and have a durable skill set that I can be in for the rest of my life. So, one of the things I pursued was internship opportunities, and there was an internship down in the Cosmopolis area for Weyerhaeuser, which for folks that aren't familiar with Washington, it's out on the coast and is kind of a former timber community that Weyerhaeuser has a big presence in. So I spent a summer down there doing GIS work for them and some inventory related things, and that was really what opened the door for me to get hired by them when I got close to graduation. And I count myself as very lucky because I think I was like one of the last people that was hired before the recession in 2008. And then there was effectively a hiring freeze for like a year. So I came in kind of when, the crash was happening, budgets were getting cut, like layoffs were happening, all kinds of craziness was going on. And I was really fortunate that I had some mentors and folks that saw the value in my skill set and kept me through all of those things and eventually gave me the opportunity to work on the LiDAR program at Weyerhaeuser.
Yeah, very cool. And I think you were there for a good 5 years or so, so quite a few years with Weyerhaeuser. Um,
Yeah.
what can you so Weyerhaeuser? You mentioned lidar, and again, we're probably dating ourselves because we're maybe a different vintage than the current generation. Um, and things have changed. And back when we met, way back in the day, things were quite early and even then when we met, from what I remember, Weyerhaeuser was already ahead of the game in terms of how they were using some of this LiDAR technology. It certainly
Mhm.
wasn't new. There's some patents that Weyerhaeuser had as related to LiDAR technology in individual trees. But you were in charge of forest inventory. And so thinking of that, um, what can you share in terms of that program and what it meant to you and the type of work you were doing? And this is again putting us in that 2019 to 20 or 2009 to 2014 time frame. What was lidar like back in the day from your recollection?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of like the exciting new thing, at least like because I came from the University of Washington and Precision Forestry Cooperative, like lived and breathed LiDAR. Bob Mugoy and Steve Riedeboe and Hans Eric Andersen are kind of like, relatively big names in that space, and so I got the opportunity to work with them. So it just felt like this kind of emergence of a technology that was going to have a big impact. As far as like what I did at Weyerhaeuser, I was fortunate in that I landed on the Timberlands IT group, and that was the group that maintained the forest inventory for the whole company, as well as the GIS. Um, but through the LiDAR program, I was able to work with a lot of really talented biometricians, programmers, just photogrammetrists, like people that were, I mean, the team at Warehouse are very talented folks that had, been there for a long time. And the thing that was really most exciting for me was that it was an unsolved problem and it was hard. Like I didn't know, I remember one of the days when I first started there, my manager was like, "Hey, we've got all these discs. Can you do something with them?" And so like I opened like a door that was like a closet full of like external hard drives that weren't labeled, that all had different cables that were different shapes and sizes with different ports. And I went through and cataloged them. And one of the things that was cool about the time that I was there is we went from this like pretty ridiculous when you think about it now, storage situation on external hard drives to actually having a server that could hold, several terabytes of data, which back then was a big deal. And so there was like all these interesting problems where we were running up against like actual constraints in compute and technology, in addition to the problem we were trying to solve. So it was just a really interesting mix of like technology, research. It's where I learned how to code, how I, got familiar with databases, where I learned what, program and product management was, and then I liked it. So it was just a really important part or moment in my career because I got to like bring my forestry expertise, get all these technical chops, and be surrounded by some of like the, smartest minds in the business, really, for to create this operational product.
Yeah, very cool. And I often joke some of us are blessed and cursed because we always look for those hard problems and learn from the previous trials. But I can one up you on the hard drive story because while it's 2023 now, I was a call not so long ago, and it was some foresters that said, "Kev, I don't know what to do with this LiDAR data. I've got these hard drives," and I thought, "It's the big deal. Just plug them into your computer. It's like there should be no issues." And they said, "We just don't know. We need your help." And I said, "All right, fine, just ship the hard drives to me. I'll sort it out." I'm like, what is wrong with these 2023 Foresters? Can't handle these hard drives, right? And this box comes, and literally it is heavy as bleep. And I'm like, what the heck is in this thing? And I open it up, and literally, and this is 2023, literally
Uh-huh.
hard drives, external hard drive, not even like in an enclosure, and there's 26 of them. And I paused and I thought, no wonder these forcers had no clue what they were doing or how to do this, because even I had to pause and go like, wait a minute, I got to go back to my old trade craft here to figure out how I'm going to handle these 20 some odd literally SATA drives that are just like hard drives, but so
Right.
it's still alive and well in some areas. So what did
Yeah.
LiDAR mean for you? Like back then you were touching it, you're coding it. I hear there is different, we were tackling different problems back then versus probably what they are today. And we'll get to that because it's kind of funny. You talk about limited compute and now you work with
Hmm.
a company that has probably unlimited compute. So, dichotomy
Close.
of
Yeah.
two worlds. But before we get there, thinking of the landscape there, was LiDAR something that Weyerhaeuser, woke up, ate, breathed it. It was embedded in their day-to-day forestry business, or was it still something that had to gain traction and you had to work with them in creating that change within the company?
Hmm. I was fortunate that, like, as I was starting there was a couple of folks in the strategic planning group that have since retired, that were really champions for it, and then also folks within the R&D group. And they were really the front runners that saw like the real value in it. And also, if you think about Weyerhaeuser as a business or any company that makes money. They're trying to reduce costs and have better information, right? Because like one of the things I appreciated about Weyerhaeuser was that it always felt like they wanted to make the right decision and they were always very data based. And I really appreciated the integrity that came with that. And so I saw the LiDAR program as an extension of that, desire to have the best data possible to make the best decisions possible for their business, the communities around them, and the regulatory and ecosystems side of things. So, um, and I don't know if that's really answering your question, but LiDAR for me there was really about kind of the next level of the business and next phase of the business. Because, it's like things are going digital. As you know, there's fewer and fewer people getting into forestry. How do you continue to manage a giant land base with fewer and fewer people and, that kind of thing. So I really saw it as like a force multiplier in some way, to use a jargony term, to help, the company like continue to have, good data to make good decisions and, effectively run their business.
It's funny you share that because that was back then, and if you were to flash forward to today, one might say it's still the same challenge, limited workforce, large land base.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
need more force multipliers here to really transform or nudge this business forward. So
Yeah.
we'll come back to forestry because I'm dying to kind of take all our listeners on this sidecar journey and eventually bring it back to forestry. Just given your background is totally cool. So
Mhm.
for our listeners, we're going to go down this path with Alicia, where there will be Amazon, there will be Microsoft, and Google. And so when you think about the fangs of the world, it's like I don't think there's that many that would say, hey, I've worked at multiple of these large companies. But maybe, and on top of that, we'll touch on LiDAR, but maybe in a different context as it pertains to autonomous vehicles. So I'm
Mhm.
sure everyone listening now is like sitting up saying, okay, tell me more. But maybe before we get there, is walk us through that journey of Microsoft, then Amazon, and then maybe we'll take a pause there before we go into the other adventures. But how did that come along? Because that's not forestry, like that's a different
No.
path. So there's got to be a cool, and it's not rafting either, because I know for our listeners, it's on your CV, you were a raft guide as well. So when I
Yep.
was prepping, I was trying to think, was it a rafting program? Was it a forestry program? Was it an inventory? But educate myself or share with me what happened.
Yeah, it's a question I get asked a lot. It's totally reasonable because it's a non-linear connection when you look at it, right? So, going back to what I said about graduate school, I went into graduate school being like, I want to have a career for the rest of my life. What's a skill set that everyone's going to want and need forever and ever? Geospatial data. That was the thing. I chose to focus on forestry initially, but as I like started to kind of I had a wonderful experience at Weyerhaeuser. It was a great company to work for, but it was at the time very flat structured, and I didn't see a lot of opportunity to move up and develop into the kind of leadership roles that I wanted to get into. So at the same time, I also met my now husband, who is a geologist, and he is very literally tied to the ground in the Seattle area. So I kind of had this decision point of like, how do I get the growth I want in my career, be able to have a longevity of career, and stay in the Seattle area? And what came together was tech. And I had some really great help along the way from friends that I actually knew through. I also am a ski patroller at one of the local, at the time, a mountain called Crystal Mountain, in the Seattle area. And a bunch of the people that were on the patrol with me were in tech. And as I started talking to them and being like, hey, this is what I'm looking for, this is my skill set, this is what I like to do, they're like, that's called program management, and you can do that at big tech companies. And I was like, right on. How do I like frame my resume to reflect these things? Because someone in tech would probably look at a forestry background and be like, how does this relate? So my friend Jan was really helpful in basically walking me through like how to like format my resume to speak to those kind of like program and like product management type skills. At the same time, like the sun and the moon and the stars kind of aligned in that Bing Maps was looking for somebody with GIS industry experience, and I was looking for a job. So it just kind of all came together through a series of like very deliberate actions and a fair degree of luck.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, amazing. And part of me, I'm picturing you on the ski lift with a bunch of other people talking shop
yeah.
and but the amazing thing is it just reemphasizes, the power of networking and networks that, when we're young or when we were younger, we always heard that network. And to some extent, everyone I talk to at some point in their careers, it's the network that either pulls them in a direction that they didn't intend to, or you needed help and then you tapped into your network or discovered other networks that opened up new opportunities. So that's totally cool.
Yeah.
And so you're at Bing, and then so again, it's like we probably have to explain Bing because there's maybe some people who are like, what is Bing? But Bing to you
Yeah.
when you got there, and what was your mandate with Microsoft? And how was Microsoft different than Weyerhaeuser? Just out of curiosity.
Oh, yeah.
Probably asked that
Wow.
for every company you've worked at since then.
Yeah. So I guess let me answer the Bing part first. So for those of you listeners who aren't aware, Microsoft has a search engine called Bing. As with any good search engine, there is a map that goes along with it. So I was hired to basically be like the geodata program manager. And what that meant was like the way that Bing Maps was built at the time was that we acquired a bunch or purchased data or licensed data from Here Technologies and a bunch of other people, put it through our proprietary blender and, created our map out of it. And that's what you saw presented was this mishmash of, Here data plus other stuff. And my charter was to basically think about what's the new things that our customers would want to see, and figure out how to like source the data and get it through our pipeline and make sure it was repeatable. And then the other part of my job, which was fascinating but also very hard, was handling customer complaints, or what we call dissatisfaction or DSAT reports in the industry. So you open your little text box and you're like, hey, Bing Maps, you're totally missing my house. What the heck? It would go somewhere. And I basically worked with a group of machine learning experts to build a natural language processing model that like read your comments and figured out what engineer to send it to. So, and also dealt with some front end related stuff because like the user interface was like uh, archaic at best, I think, for Bing Maps when I started. So I did a bunch of things mostly related to data. As far as like the difference between like Weyerhaeuser and Microsoft, I will just say that Microsoft was an incredibly challenging place to be for a variety of reasons. And this was right before the new CEO came in. And I think there was a lot of DNA left over from Steve Ballmer that was really challenging. So I went from Weyerhaeuser, which I had one of the best managers I've ever had in my career and a really fantastic group of coworkers with a really well understood like mission, to a very ambiguous, very challenging group of coworkers, mixed review on boss situation. And it was quite frankly very hard. Like it was something that I wish I'd had more like mentorship or preparation for, because it was probably one of the biggest jolts of my career was making that transition.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly for those listeners who want to learn more, they could Google and look at that transition from the old Microsoft CEO to the new one,
Yeah.
and honestly even the transformation that Satya has realized now, even if we look
Yeah.
at AI and ChatGPT, the investments they're making there, and we'll touch on that.
Yeah.
So with that transition, I guess, yeah, yeah. So maybe I should pause and because maybe some of our listeners are going to say, okay, what the heck is program management and product manager? Because if
Yeah.
courses listening, and maybe some of them will go like, yeah, I want to do what Alicia did. I want to ski, surf, whatever it is, outdoor, hang out with people and figure out, what my career progression is. But maybe I should
Yeah.
pause. I'd be remiss not to ask, what is this title and what is its function for the lay forester like this guy?
Totally. So in tech, you'll hear about three or four different job functions being thrown around a lot. So there's program manager, product manager, and like software engineer. And there's a variety of types of software engineers and, customer facing back end. I won't go into all that, but depending on the company you're working for, program and product management can be very similar or vastly different. At Microsoft, the program manager, and they were the company that originated this role in tech back in the day, was like the person that would interface with customers and kind of understand what their requirements are, and then also work with the development teams, the engineers, to be like, hey, our customer said they need a widget that does X, Y, and Z. Can you guys build this? And then work with them to figure out, like, the engineer comes and says, hey, widget XYZ, we can't quite do that, but we could do this other thing. Then going and having a conversation with the customer and being like, hey, like, we actually can't do this and here's why, and we think this will be better. So it's basically, you can think of it as like the customer facing person who's really understanding like the business requirements, the use case, like what do you want to do with this thing? What is it that you want? Why do you want it? How do you measure your success? And then working with the technical teams to build it. And a lot of times, like at Google in particular, there's kind of a trifecta of folks. The product manager, who's that customer facing role, the program manager, who is like helping kind of wrangle all the things. Like you got to work with a variety of teams. You've got, a bunch of different deadlines. Maybe there's touch points across organization. And then an engineering manager who's working with the technical team to build the stuff. So between the product, program, and engineering manager, those are the folks that are like working to build a thing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. No, absolutely. That's a great explanation for sure. And so thinking of that, you're at Microsoft and then you ended up at Amazon working
Mm-hmm.
on, I believe, the last mile logistics maps, which I'm assuming is maps of the last mile, which historically were the hardest thing, or am I totally oversimplifying that initiative that you were that product manager again on? But what can you tell us about that? And I find it fascinating because again, Forrester, Warehouser, Microsoft, and then we're going to Amazon, and we haven't even got to where you are now yet. There's still two more pit stops along the journey that I'm dying to learn more about. But
Yeah.
how did you end up at Amazon now? Like, was this a camping trip now with other people and had a conversation, or what happened?
So again, my network. There was a person that I met when I worked at Microsoft who was kind of the one of the shining, beacons that I like gravitated towards. That was a very kind person and super helpful. He ended up actually going to Amazon's Prime Air initiative, which is the drone delivery thing that most people have probably heard about in some form or another over the years. Um, and he connected me to the last mile team because they were looking for someone who understood geospatial data, which you're going to see the theme following me here, to help build a map that could be used by delivery drivers to get packages to your house. Excuse me. The last mile is like the name of an organization within Amazon Logistics. Um, and yeah, it speaks to from the kind of uh, warehouse to the final delivery, and talking about that. So we were trying to figure out how to build a map so that we didn't have to like continue to pay for map data. And there's a really interesting sidebar that goes off that I'm not sure exactly how much I can talk about, but Amazon and some of the other big companies have gotten heavily invested in OpenStreetMap, and this project was one of the original kind of participants in that realm. And a bunch of things grew out of that you can see now in Facebook's or Meta's involvement, Grab, Lyft, a bunch of other companies that have chosen to invest time and resources into OpenStreetMap.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I guess I never thought about that. Microsoft had Bing Maps, Google had Google Maps, and Amazon had nothing. And so yeah, I
Yeah.
see that as a gap. And it also makes me think back to maybe one of Esri's users conference where Jack Dangerman was talking. I remember he was talking about within the internet itself having different winners and losers, and one was around the geo side of things and who would win that part of the internet operating system versus the other pieces. And yeah, I never thought about that. That was quite fascinating. So you were there at Amazon for a short stint, and I guess I guess you took another trip and tapped into your network.
Yeah.
But you ended up at Google in the geodata engineering side, which again, if folks who are listening haven't connected yet the unifying thread of geospatial data, then we'll both Alicia and I will tell you, yes, it's important. It's a fascinating space, and I think even back in our day, there was some study that was commissioned that had flagged that as at being one of those unique value propositions of where you should focus your energies back in the
hmm
day. But now you ended up at Google. What happened there?
Yeah, so to follow along with my network as well, this time I was at a conference for there's a group here called the NWAC, Northwest Avalanche Center, and they host a an annual like snow safety, come and talk to other people who are backcountry skiers. And a friend of mine and I went, and she introduced me to a friend of hers who is an engineer at Google. And through that relationship, I was able to come in and interview. And Google was always kind of the goal. I mean, when I left Weyerhaeuser, if someone had told me that I would get a chance to work at Google, I would have told them they're completely nuts. And like, but it was always kind of like, if I'm going to work in digital, consumer facing map data, that's it. That's the one. Clearly the industry leader. So I went there, and there's a great team in Seattle that works on developing like data for the map that you see on googlemaps.com, or the data that also gets served out through like our Google Maps platform, which is the APIs and SDKs. And do I need to explain APIs and SDKs real quick, or
You probably
um,
should, yeah.
okay. So APIs and SDKs are developer tools. So if you think about like if you go to like Airbnb.com and you see there's a Google map there and they're showing you where your Airbnbs are, it's all the tools that are used by a developer to create that map experience on the internet or on a mobile device. Um, so I was working on producing data from algorithms. And what that means is, for example, Google drives these Street View cars, and we get this great corpus of 360 imagery, and we can do fun things like run machine learning on them to read the signs of businesses and add, businesses to the map. One of the things that I transitioned into was this. There's a very visionary engineer that I worked with who saw that Google had this opportunity to really expand their footprint for the map in emerging markets. And what I mean by that is like if you think about um, Africa, Southeast Asia, places in like India, Pakistan, there are billions of people in these places that are going to be mobile first users, meaning that those countries just skipped the whole like wired telephone system and went straight to mobile devices. And so folks are getting onto primarily Android devices, and that's their interaction with the internet, with the world, et cetera. And Google had done some work in these countries, but hadn't done like the same degree of work like in the US. So what we did was really focus on these large cities around the world that maybe didn't have like as in-depth of map data, and built the maps for those cities. And we tried as much as we could to use algorithms because we wanted to, again, scale, have this force multiplier, use things like aerial imagery, et cetera, to derive interesting things.
Yeah, yeah, and it's amazing the technologies like we're still talking about geospatial data,
Mm-hmm.
maps, airborne lidar imagery, and it's things that we use in forestry, and it's fascinating. In 37 minutes, we're still talking about your life journey, and I promise our listeners, I will bring the conversation back in a moment, but
Yeah.
maybe before we get to the Google engine side of things, Carmera.
Mm-hmm.
And what again? I sound like a broken record. What happened there? Because now we're going to autonomous vehicles and lidar. So I'm dying now to know what the story here is.
Yeah, so again, going back to my network, the person that actually hired me at Amazon um, went to Carmera and recruited me to join, and as well as several of the other people that I had worked with at Amazon. So there was some really talented like geospatial scientists that were at Amazon working on the problem there that were, brought into Carmera. And at the time, this was like 2019, I think. And, going back, if we can remember pre-pandemic, like autonomous vehicles in 2019 were like all the thing, right? It was going to change the world, all the stuff, right? So I was kind of at a point in my career where I was interested in trying a smaller company. I was interested in being a bit more in a kind of greenfield space. And the other thing that was really cool about the opportunity is that I get to work with LiDAR again. Instead of aerial LiDAR, it was terrestrial LiDAR mounted on a car, driving around, and then trying to derive maps from that. And working in a startup has a different um, pace, has a different exposure to things. Got to work with some really interesting customers, do a lot of different things that I wouldn't have gotten to do at a big company. Um, so yeah, it was an interesting experience and like definitely like pretty far from forestry, obviously, but a lot of the concepts are the same. It's geodata, terrestrial systems and LiDAR. I'd seen some of that when I was at Weyerhaeuser and, had kind of kept up on the industry. So it's again, like the skills that you have for using or doing geospatial analytics and forestry are really applicable anywhere. It's the same technologies applied to a different problem space.
For sure. Well, I used to joke with a lot of people who would ask, what we did and what's special about it. And I would say it's a point line polygon. I don't care if it's a fire
Yeah.
hydrant, a house, what like it could be a polygon, it could be a point. It don't matter to me. It's kind of potatoes. But
Mhm.
in that amazing career journey, and again, for our viewers, if you're seeing Alicia, she's not end of career. You're still like lots of years obviously to go. So amazing to see where you are now, and it's almost like as I looked at your journey, you kind of have come full circle because now you're back at the dream job with Google,
Mhm.
dealing with Google Engine, which is going to touch on climate, forestry, like that whole outdoors thing that was the spark, I guess, initially in your career, what you were seeking. So fascinating journey. But maybe to bring us full circle now, you're back at Google now, and then we will stop going through the career journey here because hopefully you don't have nightmares now from this podcast reliving all these journeys. But you're with Google now, and again, a product manager, but with the Earth Engine sustainability solutions. So, what's your mandate there? What are your priorities there? Because I'm assuming they're important, just given the state of the world, climate, wildfires and forestry, et cetera. Like there's a lot of need for compute and geospatial analytics, et cetera. But what are you working on there? Or what can you share with us that's super cool that's within your mandate right now?
Yeah, totally. And I guess to caveat this a little bit, I have been in this role for just over a month, so I'm still very much figuring that out. I had spent 2.5 years on Google Maps platform, which are those APIs and SDKs I was describing before I got this opportunity. So, yeah, so I mean, I think if folks aren't familiar, like Google has made like a pretty significant like commitment to, I think it's like a gigaton of carbon removal. Um, and so they're very serious, as most of the large companies are, about trying to have some meaningful impact on climate change. And specifically, Earth Engine, some of the listeners might be familiar with, for a long time until last year, it was a tool that researchers and academics could use or nonprofit groups. Last year, one of the things that happened was that Google Earth Engine became, in addition to that, a commercial product. So Limb Geomatics could use it, Weyerhaeuser could use it, anyone could use it as a paid service and managed service. And with that, the one of the reasons for doing that was to think about the impact that Google Earth Engine could have in the hands of commercial companies and being able to derive insights that help business decision making and other things that support sustainability goals, climate change, et cetera. So part of what I'm trying to work on is think about like what's the value add on top of Earth Engine that we can build or have our partners build to help companies meet their sustainability goals. And one of the things that I can see if I can find the link to it, but there was a case study or an announcement done where Unilever, which is a giant, they call them consumer packaged goods, but Unilever makes like everything from like soap to food. If you know, it's kind of like craft, or I'm not sure what the Canadian aspect would be, but giant company. They source palm oil from places in like Indonesia, et cetera, and they're very concerned about removing deforestation from their palm oil supply chain and other commodities. So they worked with a partner called NGIS, which is based in Australia, and built a product called Tracemark, which is something that other folks can use to help them kind of see like where those farms were, where their supply was coming from, and be able to see if there was deforestation happening as a result of growth of palm oil, and also just be able to give them a more transparency into their supply chain. So that's an example. There are other areas that we're interested in looking into, and obviously, like I don't know if this group would necessarily be familiar with it, but the European Union has been leading the way in a lot of the kind of climate accountability and reporting aspects. Like there was just a piece of legislation passed at the beginning of this year that says that you have to prove all the way down to the farm level that the commodities that you're sourcing to make your product are not causing deforestation. So if you think about that from a geospatial perspective, there's a whole lot of opportunity there, and it's going to be a regulatory requirement. So part of what I'm thinking about is how can we help companies that are complying with this regulation, get the information they need to meet those metrics, et cetera.
Yeah, that's crazy cool. Like an amazing role, but also sounds very challenging in trying to figure out what are those priorities and where you should invest your time and maybe your team's time or Google's time in some of these things. And so thinking of like Google Engine, and you mentioned it, like, again, a lot of the researchers I know, historically, I guess it was a free thing for researchers to use, and now it's commercially available. And even then, I think when we played around with it, like it wasn't cost prohibitive by any means in terms of gaining access. But thinking of the landscape, as a forester, what would your recommendation be? Because again, you're in this unique position where you were a forester and like many moons ago. Are there any pro tips you would give to the foresters today? In because some of the problems the foresters are facing, truthfully, haven't, I would argue, have changed or maybe evolved. I wouldn't say they've really moved that much forward. So in light of that, thinking of large volume compute, data processing, all that jazz, how can Google Engine help foresters today in some of those scenarios? Or how can you envision Google Engine helping them based on you being a forester by training?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, Earth Engine is really an incredible product in that I think one of the benefits, and I saw this, even when it was first released like 10 years ago, I think, is that there is a data catalog that is accessible that gives you a very wide view, Landsat, Sentinel, all these kind of, like very mid-resolution, to low resolution, but gives you a landscape level view. So I think from a forestry perspective, Earth Engine could be really helpful there. And also, like as foresters start to look, maybe down at maybe their management block level, thinking about how they could bring in their high resolution imagery to use, some of these like remote sensing algorithms on. Because one of the things about Earth Engine is that you can write, calculations for NDVI or whatever thing you want to like pull out of imagery, and if you have access to higher resolution imagery, that's something you can bring into Earth Engine and use the compute power against. So maybe you're not having to like, I don't know if this is true anymore. I mean, my experience is a little dated, but you're not having to get a giant hard drive for your desktop and kick something off and hope it runs. You can use Earth Engine or something like that, where the real one of the real benefits is that Google's infrastructure is handling the compute and how it's being broken up and how it's being run, and you don't have to hope and pray that your batch job on ArcGIS crashes, doesn't crash or something like that. So I think for foresters, like I think really thinking about the imagery assets that they have and how and what insights they want to get out of them, and thinking about Earth Engine as, a piece of that toolbox that could be used to help derive those insights that they need to make their management decisions
Yeah,
is would be
sure.
interesting.
Yeah, for sure. And no, times have not changed. The batch job still fails for some reason with a 9999 error or something of that. So I'm sure there's some of us listeners laughing because they get those codes, and others will be just wondering what are they talking about? But inside, so very
Yeah.
cool on that front. And so given your experience where you are today, and I know you're just a month into the job there, so it's still for our listeners hot off the press what Alicia Sullivan's thinking, but lots of room to figure out where you want to take your ideas and innovations going forward. But maybe given your awareness, well, your network, obviously, the awareness of what's happening in the tech scene, because you're obviously living it, breathing it every single day to a different level than maybe some of us can appreciate. Um, what are some of those things that gets you excited, like from a technology point of view? Because like you're touching and living like the latest and the greatest, the bleeding edge side of things. But what are some of the ones that you're following now that gets you up in the morning, and or maybe is influencing your current thinking? Is there anything that's super cool?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's talking about like the Bard and ChatGPT and large language models and those things, and those are very cool. And I think used in, and I'm going to like say this is absolutely my opinion, nothing to do with Google. Used in the right applications can be, going back to force multipliers, something really important. And I think about, someone being able to say, hey, Bard, can you write me an Earth Engine script that calculates NDVI and tree height between April 2022 and April of 2023, and put it in this GCS storage bucket, and have a conversation like that, and have the script be generated? It changes the barrier to entry to using some of these tools, which I think is actually really cool. The other thing I think about is the attention right now that is on climate tech. And climate tech, I think, is like a fancy way to say like information about the natural world, solutions for solving climate change, et cetera. And I think foresters and people that are in the natural sciences, geology, et cetera, have a really unique place in that these companies are primarily very well-intended, motivated technology specialists that don't have a science background or don't have the specialty in forestry, like geology, water resources, et cetera. And so I do think there's a real need for folks who do have those expertises in the sciences to work with these companies, because I think you bring the kind of the science and on the ground know-how to people who can translate that into a technology product that hopefully makes your job as the person on the ground even more impactful. And so I think there is like a real need for a conversation to be had amongst on the ground practitioners of natural resources and these startups and big companies that are focusing on climate tech, because I feel like if there isn't a conversation, there will be things missed in both directions. And so my impression from my time in forestry is there was always a bit of a distrust of, the tech folks or the people that sat in the office or, whatever. And I can completely appreciate where that comes from, but I would challenge folks on this call or on this listening to this podcast to really think about them as allies and how to find common ground such that you both can achieve the things that need to happen for the end goal of, you know, more sustainable forest management, better climate outcomes, you know, the carbon markets, helping sort that out, because I do think things like that are very important and need expertise that maybe isn't there right now
Yeah,
in
no,
those
it's
areas.
interesting point, and
Mhm.
you're absolutely right that often, even today with organizations, it's always IT is loved or IT is despised to the nth degree, and and really you got to learn to coexist and work together as one team. So it's interesting from that point of view. I wanted to kind of maybe get your thoughts on maybe a different angle, and the reason I'm kind of pausing is I know on your LinkedIn profile the diversity inclusion side of things is something that's
Mhm.
important. And truthfully, on this podcast, there have not been very many women that I've been able to tap into as foresters, and even we go to events, or when you used to go to the forestry events, or maybe you will in your new role, just to pop in and say hi, and you look around the room, it's, at least in North America, it's still a lot of white Caucasian men in their probably now late 60s type of thing.
Yeah.
But especially for like a woman who's obviously been successful in her career in technology, which again historically has had a broad culture, whether you want to pull the Silicon Valley, all this stuff to
Mhm.
the forefront. But what has your experience been? Has it, I know you've mentioned strong mentorship and maybe a couple speed bumps, but why is diversity inclusion so important to you? Are there certain points in your career that you just realize it's critical and you want to look at giving back, or do you just want more of yous around there at the table or breaking the glass? What does diversity inclusion mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and this I would attribute, to directly my time in tech, because to your point, in forestry, not because I think anyone's like intentionally doing this, but there isn't a lot of diversity in forestry. I think I don't know why exactly that is, but it is. When I got into tech, I had exposure to a lot more different kinds of people in all dimensions. And one of the things I realized is that the quality of ideas, the quality of solutions, the quality of interactions can really be amplified by different points of view. And when people work collaboratively that have different life experiences, different backgrounds, different skill sets, you get a much fuller picture and fuller solution space, I guess. Because, like I have my background, you have your background, you're going to see something differently than I will. And I think when we can actually like get all those ideas out, you end up with something better that's probably more representative of your actual user base than if it's people who, have similar backgrounds that, similar life experiences, et cetera. So I saw the value in it and saw why tech was able to do some really innovative things because they are bringing people from all over the world, different backgrounds, different skill sets. In addition to that, one of the reasons why it's important is that um, I struggled in my career, especially like when I got into tech, with finding mentors and people that aligned with my values. And so I think it's important for me personally to give back because, I struggled and there were people that helped me. And I think that it's important that, I do the same. And it's also really important that, like, for me to think about including or having a safe space for people to feel like they can walk into an environment and contribute, because it is intimidating, or at least it was for me, to walk into my job at Weyerhaeuser and almost everybody's my dad's age, and um, you know, it just was intimidating. Like, so it's important, I think, to bring more people of different backgrounds and different perspectives in, because I think you just get a better environment and product out of the other side. And also I feel like there's going back to the forestry challenge with like getting folks into the industry, like I think it needs to be more inclusive and supportive because there needs to be a wider base of people to pull from.
Yeah.
Otherwise everyone's going to retire and no one's going to be backfilling. So it has to be, I think that we as professionals in this age group and maybe a little bit younger really need to be looking at, what are the things that we put up with to get here that, we would want to maybe make easier for someone else or remove.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And
Um,
I know some forestry companies have even gone so explicit that they have purpose-built like talent management programs where they're picking the brightest of the brightest and putting them in these programs. And moving them through in the hopes of maybe blasting through some barriers that some of us may never hear. Which reminds me, like more diversity is actually key, because I remember there was a meeting way back where I talked about Z values and LiDAR. Then at the end of the hour talk, someone said like this Z thing. What are you talking about? This Z thing? And I like, oh crap, I'm in the US. The Z thing. Oh, the Z. And I can't believe for 60 minutes I lost someone because I was Canadianizing my Z to Z. But something as simple
Sure.
as that, maybe if there's a bunch of us, then it would have been more apparent.
Yeah.
So thinking of that, no, that's great feedback there. And as we look forward to Alicia today and Alicia back when you started, any pro tips you would give our young digital foresters? Because the thing I find fascinating about this podcast is the foresters who come through. They're on their phone, they're doing stuff I don't even get, and I think of myself pretty techy, and they're doing stuff, and they're just like, why wouldn't you do it this way? It's like, oh, okay, I wouldn't never even thought about it that way. Um, but there's not that many to our conversation that are coming through, and I know a lot of people are doing different recruiting activities. But if you're to look back and your younger forestry days, any pro tips? Are there top 10 3 Alicia Sullivan? Gee, younger self, if I knew this now, like what would you say to that younger you?
Gosh. Well, I mean, one thing I do think about a lot is that I would probably just tell the younger me to like chill out a little bit because I was really stressed out about a lot of things that I didn't need to be. But I think that's just something that comes with age too. But in all seriousness, I think, especially for folks who are like technically inclined, enjoy geospatial stuff, I'd say don't underestimate the power of that skill set because in forestry, there is a deep understanding of some very technical things that I don't know that always get appreciated. Like just being able to use, and I'm not trying to rag on Esri or anything, but just being able to use ArcGIS and go through all the things needed to like clean a data set and get it in there and do the thing you want to do. I mean, there is a high degree of technical thinking in that activity. And I feel like one of the things that I would tell folks in forestry is really look at your skill set through the lens of transferable skills and lean into those as far as like, and I'm not saying you like get out of forestry, but like lean into those as the value adds. Like what is the thing that you know about as a 25-year-old that, Alicia and Kevin don't even understand? What is that thing? How do you see it adding value to the business? And don't be afraid to like speak up. And hopefully you have leaders that are, willing to hear that. But I think it's important when you see an opportunity through a different perspective, going back to my diversity pitch, speaking up and, helping people around you see your perspective.
For sure. And I know one challenge I've struggled with is often when you're looking for feedback, you say, hey, the door is wide open, it's open all the time, and yet nobody comes through the door. So what's your secret tactic as product manager guru whose job is to get all the elicit, collate all this feedback from potential customers, users, business sponsors, champions, all that, tech jargon? Do you have a secret trick that you've kind of honed through the years around sucking the brain trust from people that you're chatting with in a good way?
Yeah, I mean, there's a book called How to Make Friends and Influence People. It's a really old book by Dale Carnegie. I think it was written in the 30s. And one of the pieces of advice that I have always found very useful is if you can get people to talk about themselves or their problems, you can get a lot out of them. So asking questions, like you've been doing with me, like what's important to you? Why is this important? And really actively listening and following up in a way. One of the things that Brene Brown talks about is using the phrase, tell me more. And it's open-ended and it's something that invites someone to talk to you. So I think if you're trying to elicit feedback from somebody or really deeply understand their problem, your job is to be a good listener and like lean into those problem spaces and not bring your bias, not bring your solutioning. you know Kevin, what is your problem? How do you, why is it important? How does it impact your business? How do you measure that? Why do you care? Things like that, where it's about listening and not about solving the problem, at least right away.
Yeah, those are good tips, and it's amazing the example you gave. There's always a full circle of stories kind of disseminating where their origin, not really sure, but the tell me more one I've heard through Matt Mockery's coaching methodology. He open sources book, and his little tactic was first to say, like, Alicia, what's that thing that bothers you the most, or like you hate the most? Like, don't tell me yet, but just think about it, and then he pauses. Then he uses the, if you're okay with it, can you tell
Yeah.
me more? And it's like Jedi mind tricks, right? Like, get me all frustrated, mad about this thing, but I don't have to share it with you. And then now he's asking, he or she, a coach would be asking permission to get
Yeah.
that feedback. It's incredible from that point of view as we think about good coaches and mentors. And so as we look to wind down, I want to be sensitive to time. I know we're a little bit over. Apologies for that. We'll wrap up. Obviously, you're open by the sounds of it to sharing your knowledge and mentorship because you went through it yourself. So as
Yeah.
we look to wind down, what's the best way for folks to get a hold of you? Is it by email? Is it by LinkedIn, or what is it? How can folks tap into you and your network if they want to chat more?
Yeah, I'd say reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me a message, or a invite request. It's always helpful if you give me some context about if you heard me on the podcast. And one thing I'll ask, if people do reach out, I am so happy to help, but have some questions before you reach out. That would be my one ask.
For sure, 100%. So if you want to connect with Alicia Sullivan, Google her on LinkedIn, and Alicia Sullivan Google, she'll pop up. Thanks so much for joining. I know I've taken way more time. I think I can chat
It's
with you
okay.
another hour to be honest with you, to come up with all these stories, but we know that time won't allow us to do that. So definitely appreciate your time. I'm hoping to maybe at some point when I'm in Seattle, maybe connect. It's been far too many years, and just trade some other stories that probably we can't tell on this podcast, but we can tell on the soda pop. So thanks very much for
Yeah.
joining me, Alicia. Definitely appreciate your time and wishing you all the best.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Great to talk to you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.